by A.R. Byrne, The Golden Age of Greece, seen through the life of her leading statesmen. We are on Chapter 7, The Years of Crisis 2. The Peace of Callias. Following on the truce, Sparta left Athens without a war on her hands, supreme in every part of the Aegean, in the Corinthian Gulf, and on the Greek mainland, from Megara to Thermopylae. Embassies came from even Regio, on the Sicilian Straits, and from Leontinoi, south of Mount Etna, both old colonies of Chalkis, asking for Athenian protection against big and aggressive Dorian Syracuse. I don't know a lot of the Greek involved here, so I'm trying to pronounce it right according to what's here. Pericles was not altogether pleased. No sooner had he got Athens clear of one commitment than another turned up. He saw clearly by now that the most dangerous trait of the assembly was overconfidence. If not treated to a good deal of cold water, it would end by straining the city's elastic, but not unlimited, strength to breaking point. But the assembly was delighted and voted friendship and alliance forever with both cities. Meanwhile, Athens was confounded with the perhaps unforeseen fact that peace has her problems, no less difficult than those of war, especially those of demobilization. What was to be done with all those thousands of citizens who in the past 30 years had lived as soldiers and sailors, largely on the contributions of the empire? This raised the further question, what should happen about these contributions? Now that the Persian War had been wound up, to the Allies it was quite plain what ought to happen. The covenant of the League, as Wade Gary puts it, lasted till the iron swam. But the cities that found ships for the fleet found them in wartime only. Correspondingly, in peacetime, the money paid by most members in lieu of ships, being a war contribution, should not be levied. There is, in fact, a tribute list missing from about this time among the surviving records of the Delian League, and in view of the number of fragments which do survive from the great marble slab on which these lists were originally published, it is rather unlikely that a whole list has perished without a trace. Merritt and Wade Gary concluded that, in fact, in the first year of peace, no tribute was paid. Well, one thing that's got to be done with the empire is a system of law, and I don't remember when Dracon had set up his four-sided little things with the rules for everyone to make sure people don't have an excuse in terms of the law. But the punishments were too even-handed, and different offenses having the same corporal punishment. But the cessation of war and of war contributions confronted Athens with the formidable problem of unemployment, the same problem that confronted Rome some centuries later. Perhaps Pericles, for all his intelligence, had not foreseen it. It has been very rare indeed in history for statesmen to foresee an entirely new type of economic situation before it has arisen. Normally, after a Greek summer war, the citizens, soldiers, and sailors went thankfully back to their farms or trades, and the problem did not arise. Even the wars of the Delian League have for the most part been sensational. Almost every sailor in Pericles must therefore have had a home of his own, at least in the sense of a place where he went in the winter. So the problem was not quite like a modern problem of resettlement, but never before in Greece had so many men been out of service every summer for so many years on end, and never before had there been concentrated in one place so large a population as now in Athens and Pyrrha, especially Pyrrha, with its large immigrant element, divorced from the land. And I guess for Europe this was the case. And one of the things that mythologically we see is the bright quarter. The bright quarter is like a season of love and then the season of hate. And war starts with a cross quarter of August in what you used to call fall, and then there'd be some sort of war, but you try to take care of the crops and whatnot before that, and after the berry harvest, I don't know, I guess the berry and the vine harvest, I guess, I don't know, people might get so drunk that they go off and start a war, and by mid-September, either it's rotten on the vines or it's fermented into alcohol. And but sometimes, yeah, there is peace at that time. The first year of peace, with the task of feeding some 20,000 soldiers, who would normally have been abroad for the summer, must have brought the problem home to everybody. The poor, his supporters, looked at their great leader, Pericles, to produce a plan for them. Now, it's not really, particularly when you're dealing with mercenaries, it's not really they want to win their battles, but the survival when you get home and stuff like that is not as much. It costs them more for you to survive, so they'd rather have you fight and get injured and die. A lot of governments actually apply for that. Well, not apply for that, but you know what I mean. It's not. That's part of the reason why they test drugs on the soldiers, because okay, they'll survive the battle, but they won't survive. Well, they're not intentionally trying to kill you. It's just not as important for you to survive that. I'm not articulating right. Pericles did not fail, nor indeed would it have taken a Pericles to devise a solution or palliative, a great program of public works. The temples on the Acropolis had been lying waste ever since the Persians burnt them 32 years before. Some foundations had been laid under Cimon, but that was before Athens had fought Persia and the Peloponnesians both at once. Since then little had been done. Work on the site for a great new national temple was probably put in hand at once. At the same time, Pericles proposed, and the assembly charged him to carry out the construction of a new middle long wall from Athens to Pyrrhus, strengthening the linked fortress, little necessary as it might seem in the heyday of Athens' sea power, by protecting the rear of the original Pyrrhus wall against a sea-borne raid such as the Spartan Brasidas once attempted on Phaleron Bay. Here also preliminaries took some time. The first preserved to us of many Gibbs at Pericles in the topical comedies, which people were just beginning to preserve in book form, comes from Kraptanos, a tough old Tory. Pericles has been building it with words since long ago, but as for doing anything, there isn't much to show. One seems to have heard his remark made in other contexts. At the same time, Pyrrhus was being equipped with worthy public buildings, its pillared corn exchange factory, facing the great harbor, corn is in kernel, by the way, and the Digma our mart, where merchants displayed their samples, were beautiful as well as useful, and the new town center was not allowed to grow up anyhow, like the little old island towns, but laid out systematically with broad main streets by the first town planner in history, a young political theorist, Epidemos of Miletus. But Pericles did not stop there. To crown the Acropolis with a temple worthy of Athens was for him the fulfillment of an ideal, and not only a means to a full employment policy, but at the same time he took a step that showed friend and foe how he dreamed of Athens as nothing less than the capital of Greece. On his motion, the assembly invited all the states of Greece and the Aegean to send delegates to a conference at Athens to consult about the restoration of the temples of Greece, burnt by the barbarians, and about the sacrifices owed to the gods in payment of the vows which we made when fighting the barbarians, and about the sea, that all men may sail in it securely, in security and peace. Would it be that great if we had a, big old army that actually fought for world security and peace, rather than armies on 2 or so sides of wars fighting for the wealth of a small number of people? These were unexceptional words, but it must have been plain to all that the only important temples burnt by the Persians, except in Ionia, had been the temples of Athens, and that the project of a conference on the freedom and security of the seas amounted to an invitation to all to recognize the Athenian navy as a pan-Hellenic institution. The envoys sent to the Peloponnese I don't know how it's spelled in Greek, met with a blunt refusal, and Sparta also used her influence to oppose the project elsewhere. The proposed conference never took place. It is difficult to imagine that Pericles expected any other result, but he had put out his manifesto. He had put forward the thesis that the restoration of the Athenian temples was an obligation to all Greece, and that the Athenian navy, by driving the Persians from the Aegean and suppressing piracy, was performing a common Hellenic service. On this moral basis, he now required the cities of the Delian League to continue to pay their contributions in time of peace. The formal step was taken by Cleinias, almost certainly the son of that Alcibiades who had fought with Cleisthenes, the husband of Pericles' kinswoman, Dinomache, and the father of the infant Alcibiades, who was to be famous in his day. Cleinias proposed a decree, which is still extant, instructing the council at Athens, the government of the cities, and the Athenian inspectors to take measures for the annual collection of tribute, and its delivery to Athens. The council is to note cases of default or negligence and refer them to the law courts without delay. Envoys are to be sent out round the empire to acquaint the cities with the Athenian assembly's decision. Among further details, every city is also to send a panoply of arms and a cow for sacrifice to the grand quadriennial festival at Athens, the great Panathenaea. The Athenian Empire was taking its final shape. It's not just your war. You got to set up you got to support the spiritual life. You got to, there's intellectual and other structure that needs to be done, but you see that's where we're going to get the Roman Empire as we know it from, right? Well, the Greek Empire. Anyways, so in the year 448 to 447 BCE, the collection of tribute recommended, but not without friction, as is shown by the quota list for the year. The last list, number 5, for 450 to 449 BCE, had room for 175 to 180 names of cities. The new list, which was almost complete, contains 146 names, with room in the destroyed portion for not more than 4 more, i.e. 25 or 30 cities, which paid in 450 defaulted altogether in the year 448. What is still more significant is the proportion of the richer and more powerful cities among those absent. The missing names included Miletos, Ephesos, Kazikos, and Aegina. Lampsakos made a token payment under 10% of her assessment. Thasos, Byzantion, and the rich Thracian coast of Anos and Abdera paid in part only. These 9 cities, with Perinthos, also on the Sea of Marmara, which perhaps paid nothing, normally produced over a quarter of the whole tribute of the League. Sparta also was being difficult. Pericles had, no doubt, meant to use the 5-year truce in order to negotiate a more lasting settlement. He could make soundings all the more easily and quietly from the fact that he knew the Spartan king Archidamus quite well, and there was a family friendship between their houses. But the Spartan assembly, the peers who elected the annual executive, the 5 ephors, were bellicose, all the more so with Cimon gone and his policy torn up. They were still bound by truce to Athens, but sailing as near the wind as possible. In 448, they sent a force across the Corinthian Gulf for the first time since Tanagra to vindicate the independence of Delphi against the Phocians, Athens' allies, in whose territory it lay. Now, one of the essential things that we might look at is the is that, particularly when we're not talking about a religion, even then, people change it the next generation, is this idea, it's about the leader and the leader's gone, we're not going to uphold this. It's like, well, if you're only upholding it because the leader's around, isn't that sort of like fanaticism in its base in terms of the word? Pericles, anxious for peace though he was, had no doubt about how to deal with such a provocation. He merely waited until the Spartans had gone home, and then, with an adequate force, marched on Delphi and put the administration of the sanctuary back into the hands of the Phocians. The Spartans had left record of their passage, an inscription granting precedence to the Spartan liberators in consulting the oracle, for which there was often so long acute that one might have to wait in his inn. Oh, in an inn for weeks. The inscription had been cut by the Delphians on the forehead of the great bronze wolf, the sacred beast of Apollo. As it stood before the temple, Pericles got a similar decree passed in favor of Athens and inscribed it on the right flank of the same wolf. And 9,000 years ago, the Greeks, the wolf cult and the turning into a wolf cult was a particularly important form of spirituality for them. Well, I mean, in the area. At the same time, Athens renewed her oaths of friendship and alliance with the Phocians, that rough Highland confederacy. For all its debt of gratitude to Athens, does not seem to have felt any devoted affection for its strange revolutionary democratic protectors. There were ominous rumblings in Boeotia too. The weak democracy at Thebes had governed badly, and was tottering to its fall. Across the narrow seas, Euboea was seething with discontent. Several cities there seemed to have commuted ships for money payment no longer ago than 450, and now found that tribute, unlike a contingent, was expected in peacetime. That mountains of northern Greece, beyond Athens' reach, were full of angry anti-Athenian exiles, bidding their time. Altogether, Pericles seems to have come back from Delphi with grave doubts whether in the event of any serious trouble the mainland position could be held. Obviously, you got to protect you got to take care of the soldiers, and wounded or not. So it should be obvious. It's like, well, in peace, well, that's why we protected you. We wanted to, continue some of this stuff in peace. Well, when they're just trying to build the empire. There was violent opposition to Pericles also at home. The conservatives chose as their new leader Thucydides, son of Pindar's old friend, the famous wrestling trainer Alesias, and a connection, probably brother-in-law, of Cimon. The plans for the great new temple, selection of artists, grants of money, etc., were going through the assembly this year. Work started in earnest in 447, and the conservatives fought them line by line. Their ground of principle was the strong one that Athens had no right to apply the money voted by the allies for the war against Persia to purely Athenian purposes. Their ground of interest was that they were little Athenians dreaming of the good old days, of an Athens of noblemen and farmers before the great wen of a seaport arose and spread. Cimon had been an imperialist, but that was when Athens was still fighting Persia. Also, it was the well-to-do classes in the empire, the Athenian conservatives, opposite numbers, who paid the bulk of the tribute, and who, if anyone could, might help to check the march of urban democracy. Thucydides, having less personal prestige than Cimon, did his best to compensate for the lack by more systematic party management than had yet been seen in the assembly. His supporters, most people could afford to give their time, were systematically whipped up, and were instructed to sit together to show their numerical strength, and still more their social rank. Social prestige counted for a good deal at Athens. No doubt they also began to use regular cheerleaders, but in a full house. They succeeded rather in showing their numerical weakness, and Pericles promptly underlined it by dubbing them the few, which carried a nasty connotation of the would-be oligarchs. It is not recorded that Thucydides ever succeeded in carrying an important motion against Pericles and the Democrats, but he made Pericles fight hard. Echoes of the debate on financing the Parthenon found their way down the centuries into Plutarch's Pericles. The name of Athens, acclaimed the conservatives, has been brought into dishonor and reproach by our transfer of common funds of Greece to Athens from Delos, and now we are deprived of our best excuses for doing this, the need for security against the barbarians by Pericles. Greece feels herself the victim of oppression and tyranny when she sees us using the money forcibly levied for purposes of war on the gilding and glorifying of our city, and Athens decking herself like a vain woman with precious stones and statues and thousand-talent temples. Well, if they're keeping up their end of the bargain, it's, isn't it fair for them to use the money that would be left over from war for, peaceful measures? But it should be a spread abroad in the empire, not just one city, but again, one city is the center of it. It's perfectly fair, don't you think, that they're using the money how they choose to. Pericles' reply was pitched in a lower key. He expounded to the people, we are told, it is symbolic of the position that he was now reaching, that the word used is teach, the word reserved nowadays by minor communist writers for Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin, that they had no obligation to give any account of expenditure to the Allies so long as they fought for them, and kept off the barbarians from these allies who do not produce so much as one horse, one ship, or one man at arms, but simply money. Money is the property not of those who pay it, but of those who receive it, so long as they perform the service for which they are paid. Athens has every right, once she has equipped herself adequately with weapons of war, to employ her wealth on objects like these. Objects, when accomplished, will be a glory forever, while during their accomplishment they will be a source of prosperity, creating a demand for every kind of labor, stimulating every craft, and setting every hand in motion, bringing almost the whole city into state employment, adorning itself and feeding itself both at once. And instead of using half of the taxes that are used as welfare for the rich, wouldn't it be so much better if my country used, some of that to take care of its poor and build up infrastructure, or perhaps take away some of that welfare for the rich and cut taxes, and because obviously taxes are a lot worse nowadays. The majority rallied to Pericles, and work went forward, but things had not yet gone far on the Acropolis when news came in autumn 447 BCE, when an armed insurrection had broken out in western Boeotia. In the debate that followed, or the little that we know of it, Thucydides and the conservatives did not appear. Old-fashioned patriotism, perhaps, and political tactics certainly forbade that they should come out openly as anti-imperialist in such a crisis. The chief argument was between Pericles, urging caution, and Ptolemaides, the probably younger, certainly more impetuous imperialist general. The situation was that a band of anti-Athenian exiles, Boeotians, Locrians, and Euboeans, all acting together, had seized the remotest cities of Boeotia, Orchomenos, and Cheironeia. Ptolemaidas was all for immediate, decisive military action to crush the revolt before it had come to spread. With 1,000 Athenian armored infantry and the local allies, he was sure it could be done. Pericles, the statesman, took a far graver view of the rising and thought Ptolemaidas' project perilous. He was for waiting, presumably to combine political action with the military operations on a larger and more deliberate scale. But he was defeated. The last defeat of Pericles in the assembly on a major issue for a long time. His last word in the debate was, "If you will not obey Pericles, at least you will not be wrong in heeding that surest of all counselors, time." At the moment people thought him overcautious, but later the saying was remembered. What does not appear is why Ptolemaidas did not at least take a larger force. It was winter, that is to say, late autumn, with snow beginning to fall on the high mountains and rain in the lowlands, a season at which campaigning was extremely unpopular with Greek citizen troops. But 1,000 armored men was very few. It is not unlikely that a considerable number of Athenian troops was still scattered over the empire, seeing to the collecting of tribute under Cleinias's decree. Ptolemaidas, however, called for volunteers and got them without difficulty, mostly adventurous young men of land-owning classes. Cleinias was one of the senior men among them, perhaps a general. There were also allied contingents, probably from the faithful Plataea and from the other Boeotian cities in alliance with Athens. Just how unreliable by now local allies were, Ptolemaidas did not appreciate. Ptolemaidas and his men took Cheironeia and sold their prisoners as slaves, a severe measure of reprisal. But Orchomenos, on its long, steep-sided spur, with a castle at its top, was too much for him, either to blockade or storm. He garrisoned the Cheironeia and started to lead his army home between Lake Copais and Mount Helicon. And we should build up a disciplined society that's ready to be called out